Hey everyone, this is Nitro. Because I was constantly asked about this, I thought I would do a video on the way to build Emilia. Now, before I begin, I'm going to talk about her skills, her talents, the best soldier she should bring, and then finally about her gear in this video. So, first things first then, who should build Emilia? And I think people who should build Emilia are those who play either Princess or Empire. It's pretty straightforward because those are the only two factions she's part of. She is not part of Strategist, so keep that in mind. Unlike Vargas, Ultimother will not buff her up. So she effectively has 3 real faction buffers. There's more, but you probably won't use those other characters. The faction buffers for her are Leon, Lance, and Bernhard for Empire. And then for Princess, it is Shafaniel and Luna, right? So it seems like there's a lot of faction buffers, but Lance, nobody really uses, so you can eliminate him as a faction buffer. Leon is generally used as a DPS, and in order to DPS properly, he needs Chivalry to get into attack range, so he's not likely to be brought as a faction buffer. And thus, if you play Empire, the only real faction buffer for her is Bernhard by process of elimination. As for Princess, well, Princess's faction buffers are Shafaniel and Luna, and both of them are pretty viable faction buffers. But what I find is that Luna, once she is fully built up at let's say 6 stars, she turns into a damage dealer, right? She has incredible ability to one-shot characters in general. So in that sense, once you have a 6-star Luna, you're probably going to use Shafaniel as the faction buffer for a Princess player. Now, with that said, although Emilia is an incredible tank, if you already have, let's say, Ledin, Landius, and Juggler built up like I do, I truly can't recommend you build her up. She's a great tank, don't get me wrong. It's just that at the end of the day, if you have these other 3 tanks built up, you don't need her for PvE, right? And in PvP, she's not really considered a top tier tank because she cannot faction buff up herself. Generally speaking, in PvP, you want tanks who can self-faction buff, right? Whereas Emilia, you're going to have to pick her and then pick someone else who can faction buff her, which is pretty tough. And that's especially tough when, of her practical faction buffers, there's only 2 of them. So if your opponent bans those 2, you're left with, let's say, bringing Luna as a faction buffer, but then if you bring Luna as a faction buffer, she can't one-shot targets anymore. So there's lots of pros and cons to using her in PvP, right? But PvE, she is a master, she's like a top-tier tank, just amazing what she can do. So, her talent, Inheritor of Divine Power, is very similar to Vargas's. The only thing is, she reduces magic damage instead of physical damage the higher the unit hit points is, okay? And she can also revive once. For her best class, she can be either a Lancer class or a Holy class, right? Lancer class, I don't know if it's called Holy Vanguard or Royal Vanguard, but whatever. I'll call them by Lancer class and Holy class, right? So what you can see from this stat box here is that her Holy class obviously has more defense while her Holy class has more magic defense, but reduced defense compared to the Lancer class. For her best class, I would say it is Templar, the Holy class, because her perk is that she converts magic defense into attack. 1.6 times her magic defense becomes her attack value. So it makes no sense to have her in the Lancer class. In addition, the gear choices just fit her better in the magic defense class later, in the Holy class later, for stacking up magic defense. I'll go into that a bit later when I talk about gear in general. So, let's now move on to talk about her soldiers. So effectively, she has 3 different types of soldiers. You can classify them as the Holy soldiers, the Lancer soldiers, and the Infantry soldiers. Infantry soldiers are very rarely used, and she uses Orc Berserker and Cyclops for infantry. Both of those, whichever one you have built, you'll use pretty much, right? It's important to note that both of those soldiers are also used by Vargas, Orc Berserker and Cyclops, so she shares those with Vargas. So it's a fairly smooth transition in terms of training ground soldiers. Which one's better out of those two? I personally think Orc Berserkers are better, but I'm not 100% sure there. At the end of the day, I don't have either one leveled up, so I can't really do a comparison. But my impression is that Orc Berserkers are better than Cyclops. They get more of an attack percentage increase, although they have a less of a base attack. I think it's 40 base attack for Orc Berserkers and 43 for the Cyclops. Alright, so moving on. After the infantry soldiers, we talk about the Lancer soldiers, of which she has 3 of them. The first one is... Actually, let me just try to expand this a little to make it bigger. See if you guys can see it better here. Okay. The first one is going to be the Vanguard Lancer, the Stone Colossus, and the Treant Guardian. Okay. Generally speaking, for Emilia, I would say her best soldier by far is the new Treant Guardians. It goes incredibly well with one of her skills. I'll talk about that skill in a bit. But basically, the reason why the Treant Guardians are the best is, first of all, as long as the soldier hit points is at 100%, they have attack, defense, and magic defense increase. I believe it's 45% at level 10. Okay. By comparison, the other 2 Lancer soldiers are really awkward in that sense. The Vanguard Lancers need to be below 70% hit points to trigger an attack increase. Hard to do. And then similarly, the Stone Colossus needs to be below 70% hit points to trigger a damage reduction effect. Also hard to do. Especially if, let's say, your healer is Tierras. So it just doesn't make sense to use the other 2 soldiers, especially when Treant Guard synergizes incredibly well with one of her skills. Okay. And finally, for Holy Soldiers, I mean, by far the best Holy Soldier for her is Zealots. Once again, at level 10, they have a 45% stat increase of attack, defense, and magic defense, maximizing their attack value. And these Zealots are shared by so many other characters. So it just makes sense to build them. Chloe uses them, Yulia can use them, Chris, Ledin, the list goes on and on. Like all of these, so many heroes, a lot of them are very viable heroes that you would actually use. And these, so, even Sakura would use these Zealots. So they're 100% another soldier well worth leveling. Whether you use Treant Guards or Zealots, kind of depends on what you're facing, right? So, with the 45% increased attack value on the soldiers, let's move on to talk about the skills and which skill synergizes incredibly well with what I just said. I'll talk about that skill first, and it's a 1-point skill. Fair Fight. When unit hit points is above 90% and you're entering combat against an enemy with lower defense than you, this unit will attack first. Okay. Keep in mind, Emilia already has fairly high defense at 345. So she is very likely to have more defense than the enemy. And as long as Fair Fight triggers, you attack the enemy before they get to counterattack against you. So if you can kill off the enemy with your damage, then you're not going to take any damage whatsoever, staying at 100% hit points, allowing your Zealots and Treant Guardians to continue to hit ridiculously hard. So that's what Fair Fight does. In addition to this, what's even crazier is her Holy Guardian skills allows her to counterattack at 2 range. So she's like Landis in that sense. Mages and so on who attack her, mages and archers and whatnot, as long as they're not using an AoE attack, she will counterattack and with Fair Fight do damage to the enemy first. So that's basically how she works. Holy Guardian and Fair Fight combo. For the third skill, you generally bring an attack skill, which is Justice, because Justice also has that Holy Guardian effect, so that she can continue to have her attack stay ridiculously high. So those would be her most common 3 skills. Justice, Fair Fight, Holy Guardian. For certain battles, you may choose to replace Fair Fight with Holy Shield, because that can increase her magic defense by another 10% when entering battle, allowing each individual attack to hit even harder. That's usually used more for, I think, boss fights, for example, challenges where the enemies you're probably going to kill off anyways. And, the enemies you're not likely to kill off in one shot, so more stats to allow you to hit harder is more important. So that's usually the 1-point skill choices. There's other useful 1-point skills, but you are not that likely to use those other 1-point skills. Except for very rare situations, I imagine. So, with everything now covered, we're going to talk about her gear, the equipment that Emilia should bring at this point. And gear-wise, I'm going to bring up the usual, SSR gear for Langrisser mobile sheet. And the gear, I'm going to first talk about why I prefer her in her Templar class over her Lancer class. And it's due to the gear selection. First of all, helmet-wise, the Lancer helmets only offer 48 magic defense. By comparison, the Holy class helmets offer 65. So that's already a pretty significant magic defense value difference. In addition to this, if you look at these helmets, very few of them offer magic defense increases. Okay. It's very awkward to get magic defense increases with the helmets and armors of a Lancer class character. By comparison, Holy class, very easy to get magic defense increases. So that's why Holy class tends to be better. If we look at this for the helmet, so I'm going to talk about, I guess, the Lancer class gear, which I don't recommend, as well as the Holy class gear at this point. So Holy class first, then for the armor, the Holy class armor, there's quite a few options that increase magic defense, right? Specifically, actually two. The Galaxy Cloak and the Baldur's Rite Robe. You don't need the Baldur's Rite Robe secondary effects, so by process of elimination, the Galaxy Cloak is the best, right? It gives 10% magic defense and 5% hit points. By comparison, in terms of armors, there's very few that give a magic defense increase. In fact, I think there's two. One is carbon fiber armor for an 8% defense and magic defense increase, as long as your hit points is below 50%. And the other one is the Arcane Battle Garb that gives hit points and magic defense, and also when attacking, after battle, you deal fixed damage to the enemy equals to 1.5 times your magic defense value. So take a pick of one of those. Don't think it really matters which one you use. At the end of the day, she's not that likely to attack in the first place, so triggering this fixed damage effect is not very common. In addition, when Emilia attacks, she will generally one-shot the enemy, right? With her version of the Power Stab, which is a Justice skill. It's called Justice, right? It does. So I'd say maybe by process of elimination, carbon fiber armor is the best one for the Lancer class. 8% defense and magic defense increase versus 10% magic defense with 5% hit points. Next, helmet. Helmet-wise, it's a real struggle for the Lancer class. The only one I see is either carbon fiber helmet, once again, or else Gaia's helmet. Gaia's helmet, though, has a huge drawback in that it only kicks in when you attack. Or so when you are attacked. So when you're attacked, you get 15% magic defense increase. When you are just standing there, when you're attacking, you get 0% magic defense increase. So I'm not a fan, So maybe once again, by process of elimination, carbon fiber helmet in the Lancer class. Moving down to the Holy class, though, you have quite a few options. Okay? In fact, there are 4. Of the 4, only 2 are good. Right? The first one is the Dark Crown. The second one is the Odin's Battle Helmet. The third one is Soul Stealer Headdress. And the last one is Tiara. Right? Tiara, in my opinion, is very gimmicky. As long as your unit hit points is at 100%, magic defense and defense both increase by 15, right? So it is usable for her, don't get me wrong, for PvE content. But for PvP, it's going to be terrible. So I can't really recommend it, Next then. So, then there's the other 3 choices. Soul Stealer Headdress and Odin's Battle Helm are both equally viable. I think those 2 are her best options. Which one you pick can be hard to choose from, because Soul Stealer allows you to, let's say, move up, activate your guard skill, and potentially silence an enemy within 3 blocks of you. That's a very nice effect to have. Odin's Battle Helm, by comparison, when you're eliminating an enemy, you can dispel 5 buffs from another enemy within 3 blocks. Once again, she has that Justice skill, so she can one-shot enemies. Thus, which one you pick is kind of up to you, ultimately, of these 2. As for the final option, the Dark Crown, you're missing out on a special effect for 5% additional hit points. So I would say it's not as good as the other two options that are listed here. So those are the armors and helmets for the two classes. Next, let's talk about the weapon. Weapons are pretty straightforward. If she is in her Lancer class, Yggdrasil Branch, because you can ignore 15% of the enemy's defense value, allowing you to hit a bit harder, right? But it does increase defense, not magic defense. It's important to note. As for Holy class, well, if you're in your Holy class, the best one is just like Ledin. You're going to want an Oath of Justice, 8% magic defense increase. Right? But if you don't have another Oath of Justice, because let's say Ledin, Listel, Juggler all want it, well, you can always use a Blue Moon. You're going to lose 3% magic defense value that way, but it's still very viable as a weapon. Last but not least is accessories. And in terms of accessories, Emilia has a pretty wide variety of options. Okay, if you really want maximum magic defense value, you'll want to give her a Veil of Light. Right? Gives 48 magic defense here, 8% additional magic defense, and gives you immunity to magic defense reduction effects. So that's for the maximum magic defense value Emilia. However, there are other options. Let me just jump into the game to go over those other options. Because first of all, the first alternate option is actually the same as Bozel. And that would be Speed Boots. Okay. Speed Boots offers a 32 magic defense increase rather than a 48 magic defense increase, and you don't get an 8% magic defense increase. However, you get +1 mobility, right? We always talk about how mobility is king and allows you to move into position easily and so on. Well, it's a very viable option for Emilia to have 4 mobility with Speed Boots rather than, the Veil of Light. Right? I should also note, a lot of people use Juggler with extra mobility rather than things like Overlord's Badge and so on. So that's a very viable option for Emilia. Other than that, she can also use an Overlord's Badge, just like Juggler and the other tanks. The main use of this is that it's very auto-battle friendly. You get all stats plus 5%, you don't get any magic defense increase, but you get the immunity to defense and magic defense reduction, you get immunity to mobility reduction, which is the especially important part. Right? Keep in mind as well, right, when you do auto-battle, there's going to be a lot of characters who can ram you around and so on. With the Overlord's Badge, you can safely ignore that. Also, it also can be useful in PvP for granting you that immunity against enemies like Leon with 1000 Hooves. Granted, not that many people use Leon in PvP anymore, but I just thought I would mention it. So, and then other than these two, another very viable option for her is a Swordsmith Medal if you have another one. The Swordsmith Medal grants that immunity to fixed damage and affects that silence active skills, as well as all stats plus 5% and increased defense and magic defense. All of this benefits her, right? Increased defense makes it easier for her to activate the skill that she has, the 1-point skill. What's it called? Fair Fight. That was it, right? Increased defense, higher chance to activate Fair Fight. Magic defense, increased attack, right? All stats plus 5%, increased all stats, affects everything. And then the final part is that the immunity to fixed damage makes you counter, let's say, enemy Listels, and being immune to silence allows her to be immune more or less to enemies like Listel and Bozel, who have Seal, right, to silence you. So Swordsmith Medal can be a very, very viable option for your Emilia as well. That way she can definitely use her guard skills, definitely use her power stab and so on. But that's more of a PvP option. Just keep that in mind. Alright, so with that, I've talked about all the gear that you would set up on to Emilia. And at this point, the final thing to talk about would just be the enchant for her gear. Enchant wise, I would say I would personally think the best option maybe to just further increase her magic defense value. And in that sense, you want a broken set of 2+2, just like what I have on Leaded, right? 2+2 blue will give you, in total, a 10% defense increase and 10% magic defense increase. So this will once again benefit Fair Fight from the defense increase, and the 10% magic defense increase will just increase her magic defense so she can hit that much harder. No, I really do think that may be her best option. Other options for her, other than that though, include Breeze. Right? We talked about how mobility is king, right? And Breeze does increase your damage dealt by 10%. So that will kick in for whenever you're in combat, the 10% damage increase, which can be, it's not as much damage increase as, let's say, 10% magic defense times 1.6 times for attack, but it's solid. And then of course, being able to have a mobility increase of 2 mobility can very much help her. In selecting Breeze, you're choosing to give up some offensive power for the ability to activate Breeze to maneuver further. And I think those two are really the best options for her. I mean, she can, just like she can also bring Thorns, right? For a 30% chance to reflect damage to the enemy. I'm not sure that's necessary because generally speaking, she counterattacks anyways, and she should hit so hard that I don't think you need Thorns to kill off an enemy. But it is an option, right? For example, I should mention, Landius brings Thorns very commonly, but in large part, Landius brings Thorns because he can often lack the attack value to one-shot the enemies, whereas Emilia, by comparison, should have the attack value to one-shot. And there we have it. That pretty much covers what I think are the 3 viable enchants for her. I mean, the very last one that can be used is Tree of Life, right? It can increase everyone's defense and magic defense by 5%, but my personal opinion is if you're going to bring Tree of Life, it should be on someone else, like your healer, for example, so that your tank, Emilia in this case, could get a maximum of 15% magic defense and defense increase, right? 5% from Tree of Life, 10% from the 2 blue enchants, or 10% damage from a Breeze enchant, whatever. And there we go. That's everything I wanted to say about Emilia. It took a while to talk about and explain, but nonetheless, I hope you found this video useful. So, thanks for watching everyone, and on that note, Nitro out.